You've seen our shows on beekeeping, and you know there's lots of different ways to keep bees. Now, I keep bees mostly in a Langstroth hive, which is an upright hive, and you put boxes on top. Well, today we have Bill White from Badger, WS Badger in Gilsum, New Hampshire. He's also got a company called Wild Hive, and I'm going to let him talk to you a little bit about that today, but he has a focus on a more natural way of keeping bees, which is in a top bar hive. So you still wear the same kind of garb, even though you don't have it on today. I have my white overalls, my helmet, and my veil, although we're not going to be going into a wild hive today. So I'm going to take these off, but if you were going into a hive, you would need to have a little bit of equipment, usually.
Well, actually, I have a photograph of Jody without any equipment on, very close to a hive the other day.
Oh.
So it depends on the day and the temperament of the bees. Sometimes there are experienced beekeepers who wear shorts and a t-shirt and can work their bees. You just have to pick your day and time.
Right. There's little things that you learn along the way, don't you, Bill?
Yes.
Yes.
So Jody mentioned that the regular type of hive are the Langstroth hives, and this is a top bar hive. And the way I got interested in top bar hives, I went to a seminar given by Gunther Hauck, who's been a natural beekeeper for over 30 years. This is his book,
Yes.
Towards Saving the Honeybees. So
And it's a good bit.
yeah. So I went because I wanted to learn what's going on with the honeybees and how we can help them. And it totally blew my mind because there was a Langstroth hive, and then there was this funny kind of a hive. It was a long horizontal hive, and it was called a top bar hive. And I didn't know there was another way of keeping bees. So the rest of that seminar, which was a weekend seminar, I was sketching designs for my own version of top bar hives with nice legs and so on. So that's how we came to make top bar hives. Mm-hmm.
So what is a top bar hive compared to a Langstroth hive?
Well, here's the deal. A Langstroth hive, it's a box and it has frames in it, and usually the frames have something called foundation, which is beeswax that's imprinted with cells, and then the bees build off of that. So this was an invention started maybe in the 1850s. And it was a way of keeping bees efficiently to get lots of honey.
Right. And it probably helped them too because maybe they didn't have the wood. Maybe they only had a little bit of wood around and they could just do what they could. So, you know, it's like being a farmer. You do with what you have.
Well, actually, I think for thousands of years they did with what they have,
Right.
which were skeps, which were made out of straw. And also there are places where they've made top bar hives in the Mediterranean area thousands of years ago out of clay.
Right.
But I should show you a top bar. This is just a bar, it's just a piece of wood. So rather than the frame that you would see in a Langstroth hive, this just has a bar, but it has a profile. It has a low point on it. It's kind of like a
Right.
V.
So if you look at this, if you turn it over, you wouldn't want to do this all the time with one of these, but you can see it's got a V, and then this little part here gives them something to start growing the wax on.
Yeah, so what happens is a top bar, instead of having frames with foundation in a top bar hive, you just have top bars. There's a whole bunch of these, and we'll open this and show you. But it has a low point, and so the bees are inside the top bar hive, and they look up and they go, wow, there's a ceiling. I think I'll make my comb on this. You could show them this thing.
Yeah. This is not exactly what a top bar would look like, but this is what they would do in nature, or if they happen to go into a barn or your house or wherever, they would make comb just like this, and it would be like that.
Yeah, so bees saw the ceiling and they just started making random comb off of this, but they're not going to go random in a top bar hive because they've got these low points that they'll choose to build on.
Okay, but Bill, you said they won't go random.
They mostly won't go random unless they feel like it.
Right.
So
bees are bees, and they may take a little detour sometimes, but as beekeepers, we try to be less invasive in one of these hives, but we do try to make them try to make the comb in lines, because if you can't pull the frames out.
Okay, so this is assuming you know things about beekeeping, but assuming you do, it's a different kind of a top bar hive. It's a horizontal, we call this one the long hive, and it's a horizontal hive that holds Langstroth frames. You could put Langstroth frames in it, or top bars. It's compatible. And what's nice about this is, let's say you're an older beekeeper and you can't lift off supers of honey. Well, there's no lifting in this. So if you wanted to harvest honey from it, you would go to the end bars, and well, we'll take that
Good
off.
time to take it off, yep. All right.
Okay, so this is the inside of the top bar hive, and this is a hive tool, and beekeepers use these. And so I'll just take out a bar. So you can see there's a whole bunch of these bars in here like this. And if you play your cards right, and you have a top bar hive, and you put your package of bees in this, or a nuke, they'll start from the front, and they'll take each of these bars, and they'll start with the first one, and they'll completely fill this with their honeycomb. So the first one would be filled, and while they're filling that one, they'll start on the second, and they'll start on the third, and they'll start on the fourth. And what they're doing is they're building their brood nest. And so they're building the honeycomb, and in this they're putting, the queen is going around and laying eggs, and they're also putting in pollen and honey, actually honey and then pollen around the brood.
So the brood is the eggs. That's how the queen is going to grow her hive. And so that's a very, very important part of the hive.
Okay, so what I've done here is these, in the Langstroth hive or in a top bar hive, these are made a very specific width. These are 1.25 inches. And what that means is when the bees build their comb, they build it pretty darn close to 7/8 of an inch wide. And they'll center it on these, which means they have 3/8 of an inch between each comb. And in a Langstroth hive, they're set up the same way, so that the bees will build their comb 7/8 of an inch, and they have 3/8 of an inch in between each one, and that's their hallway that they can work back to back, and they can fly around, they can walk around and stuff. And that's called bee space. And so you have the same thing in a Langstroth hive as in a top bar hive. You have bee space. But bees also have a tendency, once they've completed their brood nest, especially in a Langstroth hive where it's just sort of, there's no frame to guide them, that then they start doing storage honey, and they may make it thicker. They might make it 1 inch or 1.125 inches. So the way we work with these is we have spacers. So this has got a window on it, this particular hive. And what you would do is, I'll remove the cover to the window. We'll turn it this way for a sec.
Sure. Whoops, it's not on a stand.
Oh.
Okay, that's right, we can still turn it.
All right, okay. So you can see there's a glass window here. And you'd get down, you'd be looking at the bees working away, and they'd get to about here with their brood nest, and then they'll start making the honeycomb wider. And what would happen in a top bar hive is they'd start centered, but because they're making it wider, they might get off center, and you could have a big block of honeycomb, and you couldn't lift the bars out. And we want them on each individual frame, so we add spacers when we see them doing that. We might add them sooner or later, but we'll put these 1/4 inch spacers in, and that allows them to make wider combs centered on the top bars and still maintain bee space, and allow the beekeeper to still be able to pull out their bars. So I hope you know about beekeeping, so this isn't all a mystery to you. And what will happen during the year, let's say we started with a package or a nuke in this, is they'll fill out all of these, and they'll get to the end, and they'll be building comb and filling that up with honey. And if you want to harvest them, you might go in here where you have bars of capped honey. And if I wanted to harvest,
That's the other hive.
that's from a smaller hive.
Yeah.
But if I wanted to harvest, what I would do is I have a follower board, and we would leave the follower board about in here. And the reason I would leave it in here is if there's, these top bars will expand and contract from moisture, so this gives them some flexibility. It also gives me room to work. So I could take this out, and I would probably take a bread knife, a serrated bread knife, and I could look in and I'd say, okay, I want to harvest, but I'm not going to harvest this one, so I'll slide it back. And this one's not quite done. I'll slide this one back.
And what he was talking about with the bread knife is because the bees are doing this all natural without a frame, they can draw the comb right to the edge. And if it connects to the edge and you don't loosen it up a little bit, it could end up falling off when you take that frame out?
They will leave their 3/8 so they can get by, but they'll make some attachments to stabilize their comb. So I would, let's say this one is filled with capped honey and I want to harvest. Then what I would do is I'd take my bread knife and I'd cut the attachments. And then I would take this and I would move it aside and I'd pick it up. And this would be filled with honeycomb, filled with honey, and it would probably weigh about 8 pounds. And I would take a brush. Do you have a brush? No.
There's a brush right over there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would take a nice soft brush or a leaf, a soft kind of a leaf, and I would brush off the bees, and I'd take this and I'd probably put it in a box and cover it over. And I might take 3 or 4 of those out, cover it, and then I would replace these. I could either put, well, let's say I don't want to replace it. I would replace them. So I'd replace them.
There's a lot of decisions to make in a hive, so you never know what you're going to do.
I'm replacing them. Believe me, I am replacing them.
Yeah.
And now they have empty top bars that they can start building comb again and replacing the honey that I've taken from them.
So you said you've taken honey from them. So it's not like in a regular Langstroth where you would use an extractor and you would put it in the frames into the extractor. All of the honey would go around the edges and fall down, because these frames are a little bit more fragile.
Well, so I've got my, I lost one of them, the one with the little.
Oh, this one here?
Yeah, this one. Okay. So imagine this thing is filled with honeycomb, and it's actually attached very, very well. And the way I would turn it, if I wanted to look at it upside down, is so I'd turn it like this, and that would be fine. But if I were to turn it like this, now you've got 8 pounds on a comb, and it'll break right off.
Yeah, very sad.
Yeah, see,
Yeah.
very sad, and it's happened to us all, so you have to be careful. One of the reasons people have been associated with bees for, it could be 1,000,000 years, because there are cave drawings of people collecting honey. Bees have this capacity to make enough honey for themselves and then excess. And so beekeepers make this arrangement with bees. They give them a nice little place to stay, and in return the bees make some extra honey. But what you want, and all beekeepers want this, they want their bees to have enough honey to make it through the winter. So they have to be very cautious about how much honey they take from them. So I talked about harvesting, and presumably I'm harvesting because it's early enough in the season, say August? August, so that they can fill this up again and go through the winter with plenty of food.
And what Bill's looking for when he's harvesting is there's a couple of different things in the hive. There's the pollen, and there's nectar, and then there's the capped honey. And what he wants to make sure of is that it's capped honey, because honey that has been capped has a water content of about 18%. If you take it off too early, it'll ferment, and then it won't be any good. So as beekeepers, we need to know where things are at in our hives in order to be able to take that honey off.
Okay, so you've taken your capped honey out, and as Jody said, in a normal Langstroth hive, you have an extractor, and you take the honey out, and then you return the frame with the comb to this. In this case, you would either make comb honey, you would lay it down on a cutting board, and you'd cut it up and put it in a jar, and it would be beautiful comb honey, or you can do crush and strain. You'd put it in a bucket, you'd take a potato masher, and you'd mash it, and then you'd pour it through cheesecloth or something like that on a warm day, and you would end up with honey and beeswax with some honey on it. If you want to have clean beeswax, you'd stick it outside, and the bees would clean off all the honey, and then you'd have beeswax that you could melt and use.
Right. And Bill, that leads me to, what do you do with beeswax?
Well, we have the Badger Company, and you can use it for salves and balms and things like that, where you have olive oil, organic, in our case, organic extra virgin olive oil, and maybe 15% beeswax, and you mix it. It makes a nice consistency ointment or salve that you can use. And then we add essential oils and herbal extracts for healing stuff to put on your skin.
Right. And when you buy your wax, you don't buy like a pound bar at a time, do you?
No. You can make candles and stuff out of it too.
Right,
but what we do is we use about a metric ton per month. And I can't even conceive of how many bees it takes to make that. You can probably, normal hives, they probably get about 2 pounds of beeswax out of one hive. So a ton is 2,000 pounds, about 2,000 pounds. Yeah. So that's 1,000 hives for 1 ton. And we said we use 10 tons, so 10,000 hives to get enough beeswax for our operations.
Bottom line is, it's a lot.
It's a lot. And we
Yeah.
get it from northern Canada or New Zealand or Australia because they have very large, remote bee yards where they can keep bees naturally and organically, and they're still very healthy.
Right, because it's hard to have bees that are organic, because in order to have an organic yard, you need to have nothing around you except plants. You can't have any pesticides. I mean, you got to be in the middle of nowhere, because bees will fly 2 to 5 miles. So you really do need to be in a desert island almost.
If 5 miles would be like 30 square miles area where nobody's using pesticides.
Yeah.
So you have to be in a remote region to do organic, and Badger uses organic beeswax.
Right.
So what else do I want to tell you? So this is one of the ways of keeping bees. I was intrigued by this. I've seen, I talked to a beekeeper who said he and his dad took the steeple off of a church one time because it was rotting and stuff, and it had bees in it, and they kept bees in the steeple.
Yeah.
People will find bees. There's something called a cutout, where let's say bees grow in the wall of your house, and you could conceivably cut out a section of the wall.
That's what it would look like.
Might be like that.
Yeah,
and
only upside down. Yep.
Might be like that. Let's see this in the ceiling, and you could cut that out and put it in a box, and the bees would build down from that, and that could be a beehive.
Right.
So the Langstroth hives are really for the convenience of the beekeeper, and so you don't have to kill the bees. Like in the old days when they were in the basket skeps, they used to kill the bees and then take the honey.
Right.
So this is a way where your bees can make it through the winter. So Badger, we have this. We have a hive called Swarm Thrower. I don't have one in here right now, but it has slope sides, and that's the most common top bar hive. Those are my favorite, but you can't use nukes, which are Langstroth compatible. So
let me
there are
just
problems with
explain a
that.
little bit about what a nuke and a package is, just because we do have a few people that aren't beekeepers out there. A package is a small group of bees. So you've got probably 5 frames, so about probably 8 or 10 inches worth of bees.
Nuke.
I'm sorry, in a nuke. Yeah, I'm learning still.
Okay.
So in a nuke. In a package, you have all these loose bees with a queen, and you put that into the hive. So in this kind of a hive, because it's long and has the same shape as a Langstroth, the boxes that you see, you can use a nuke hive. But in a typical top bar hive, which has angled edges, you really need to buy a package because it makes it a lot easier for them to transfer over from where they are to the new home.
Yes. So one of the things characteristic of a top bar hive, there are beekeepers who've done research on this, and they believe that bees will be healthier if they're building small cells. So each of these little things is called the hexagons. Hexagons is called a cell. And that when you use foundation in a Langstroth hive, it's stamped to a certain size. So the bees will tend to build to that size. When you just give them a bar, they'll build whatever appropriate size they determine. Generally, if they're coming from Langstroth hives, they build the larger cells and then they regress, which means over several years, they'll start making smaller cells. And for some reason, that seems to be healthier for bees. It may be because they're making them exactly the way they need them. They make the number of larger cells for drones that they need. And also it's small, so there's not a lot of room for a bee and a mite. And bees have problems with mites, and so it's less favorable for mite reproduction.
Right. And what Bill's talking about is when you look at these little hexagons, they don't look like there would be that much difference in size, but a little teeny, a hair can make such a difference in the size and shape of the cell. So it really does make a difference.
So one of the ways of working with top bar hives in terms of being a natural beekeeper would be that in the ideal scenario, and we don't necessarily have ideal, the ideal scenario would be you would get pristine bees that had never been treated with chemicals, and they were very healthy, and they'd been with their queen a couple of years, and you would catch a swarm from them and you'd stick it in here, and that there'd be plenty of forage, and so their nourishment would not come from sugar water, it would come from gathering nectar and pollen, ideally. And that one possible scenario would be you never open this up, except maybe if you had to inspect. And so you'd have this in your backyard, and the bees would be coming and going. and they would be pollinating, but you wouldn't gather honey from them, so there'd be no disrupting of the hive. That would be the ideal, and that they would swarm on a natural basis.
Right.
And so you'd lose half your bees, and they'd go hang from a tree and find a new home, and then they would rebuild within here. This is sort of a no maintenance beekeeping, I suppose.
Right.
And then there are other levels of that in between that and trying to harvest as much honey as possible.
Right. This, to me, this is a perfect hive for if you really want to have something that you can observe because you've got that window there. A lot of times when you're near a hive, it may seem kind of scary, and I don't want anybody to go near a hive that is not familiar with it or does not have a beekeeper with them. But many times you can look in these windows and the bees don't even know you're there. You know, you can just quietly, not snapping, but just quietly go in, take the cover off, and you view it. And it's almost hypnotic to be able to look at the bees doing what they're supposed to do.
Someone the other day was looking at some of the badger hives, and they said it was like looking at clouds. You know, you're just looking and you see these shapes changing, and it's really, the bees coming and going is really quite fascinating.
Right.
We also have a hive here, Jody will show you photographs of, and it's called a sun hive, and it's actually made, I bought it from this guy from Germany who built it out of ryegrass, and it's in the shape of an egg that's about 2 feet tall. It has 2 halves to it, so you can open this egg up, and it has top bars, but the top bars are arced.
Right. That must take a lot of work to get those that way.
I'm sure it took a lot of work to do that. And then it's plastered with a combination of fresh grass-fed cows, cow manure, and clay that I personally plastered this thing with. So this is something that we'll introduce bees into and see if they'll take. But it's a kind of an artistic representation of the idea that you can think of a beehive almost like a mammal. So for instance, some people think, well, it's a bunch of insects. Well, that would be like looking at a person and saying, well, that's just a bunch of cells. Actually, they're organized into a distinct personality. And with a beehive, they are distinct personalities, and those bees don't live by themselves. They need to be a part of the body of the beehive to survive.
Right.
They all have functions, and so that's the sun hive is about that idea.
It's like an organism. It's one full community because the queen does what she needs to do, the worker bees do what they need to do, the drones have a very important job and they do what they need to do, and none of them could live without each other. So it's really important. Since I've become a beekeeper, it has made me look at life in general so much differently because they don't fight in the hive. They protect each other. They know what their jobs are. They're just amazing. So, you know, if you're interested in learning more about, you know, some of the bees, there's lots of kids' books out there as well as adult books. But go to the library and take out some of the books that they have. They're really fun, but they also do teach you a lot about bees because there's a lot of misnomers about bees and what they do and that they're going to attack you, or like even in the Winnie the Pooh books, the bees are swarming after Winnie the Pooh, but bees don't usually do that. Not honeybees. Other insects may do that, but not so much the honeybees.
No, the honeybees, actually, when I packaged the bees that we got, we have some bees that are called buckfast bees. They were developed in England for cold, damp climates. I put them in the basket hive, or actually I put them in one of the top bar hives, and I reached in, I lost the queen cage in the package, and I reached in and pulled it out, and I had bees all around. I didn't get stung at all. They were very gentle, and they generally are really gentle.
They are.
And they learn to know their beekeeper.
Right. I think it's a respect thing between the beekeeper and the bees, and you have to know the day and what the bees are all about, but they're not there to attack you, because when a worker bee stings you, that's it. Their little stinger comes off their body and they end up dying. So a bee doesn't want to sting you. I mean, really.
They really don't.
But they do have their jobs, and those are the little guard bees that are helping to protect their hive. I have a couple of other things that I just wanted to mention also. There are lots and lots of information online or on DVDs. I have a DVD here on top bars, so that could help you a little bit if you want to learn a little bit more about top bars. You haven't gotten started yet, but you'd like to learn a little bit more information. And then many of you may have seen some of these DVDs, Queen of the Sun and Vanishing of the Bees. These talk about bees, not so much on how to be a beekeeper, but how important they are to our entire existence, because you don't think about all of the different items that you eat during the day. You know, if you think about what you had for breakfast or what you have for lunch, you know, if you're eating strawberries, blueberries, any kind of berries, not so much wheat or grains because those are wind pollinated, but there's all kinds of vegetables, squash and cucumbers, and I mean, think about it. As much as we talk about the different ways to keep bees, there are other pollinators out there. It's not just about the honeybee. We're able to keep honeybees because honeybees will make an excess of honey, more than they will need, and so we may be able to take the honey off. But there are other pollinators out there. There's flies, there's birds, beetles,
bumblebees,
yes, moths, butterflies. I mean, there's all kinds of pollinators out there, and if we're not good to our environment, then a lot of those are going to be dying. I know that there's been a pretty large die-off of bumblebees and a lot of butterflies too. So, you know, we really have to think about what we're putting on our grass, what we're using for fertilizers, fungicides, different things like that, what we're putting on for, you know, for anything. Bees don't have to pollinate that plant like a corn. You don't have to have a corn plant pollinated by a bee in order for it to just land on it. But if we put pesticides on our corn plants or have something like that, the bee could just stop off and then it brings the pesticide back to the hive and your entire hive could be decimated. And that means other insects could be as well.
See, we think that economics are based on, you know, gross national product and the sale of cars and things like that, but actually economics are based on the idea of having healthy soil and water to grow things, because without that, you don't have any of the other stuff.
Do your research. Please think about taking up beekeeping, or, you know, have a friend that wants to have a hive, or just learn more about it, because it really is important.
The joke is ask a question to 10 beekeepers and you'll get 11 answers.
Right, and it's true. So you've been watching In My Backyard. If you are interested in being a guest on the show, or if you have questions, would like to give some of your input, you can email us, and our email address is inmybackyardch8@gmail.com, and we'd be happy to get back to you. So thank you for being in my backyard.
Thank you so much,
as I'm
Jody.
in your backyard.
Yes.
Yes.
And thank you.
So thank you, and we'll see you soon.